If you can, oh, cool. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second Meet the Team session. We have Ken from Xverse here with us today to talk about the Xverse wallet, which is a mobile wallet for Stacks. Yeah, and you can go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
Sure, yeah, I can do a quick intro and then we can maybe open up to questions. So my name is Ken. I've been working in crypto and the Stacks ecosystem for over 5 years now. I joined in 2017. I basically started contributing to the Stacks code base, open source code base on GitHub. Back then it was called Blockstack. And I eventually joined the Blockstack team. And I started helping out in engineering, building out the first iteration of what we see now as Stacks wallet, which is the Blockstack browser. It was called back then, and that kind of evolved into the first Stacks wallet. And I basically had a hand in that, and then I also did a lot of work on developing the tools that the developers today use to integrate with Stacks and Bitcoin Web3. And in about the end of 2020, I started to kind of see a need for an entity or a company that just focuses on kind of the wallet for this ecosystem and Bitcoin. So I decided to start my own company to focus on this aspect for this ecosystem. So essentially what Xverse is an advanced Bitcoin wallet, and we're building it to become the most advanced Bitcoin wallet. And we're leveraging Stacks to unlock Web3 on Bitcoin. So things like NFTs, DeFi, and much more. And we're also looking to leverage the Lightning Network for instant and low-cost Bitcoin transactions. So that's what we're doing with Xverse. We are also running Xverse Pool, which is a non-custodial stacking service, which you can use through the Xverse mobile app to stack your Stacks tokens and get a yield that's paid in native Bitcoin. So there's no wrap Bitcoin or anything like that. And there's a Bitcoin wallet built right into Xverse, which you can use to receive those rewards. So the app right now is on iOS and Android with a desktop version, desktop browser extension coming out in the next few weeks. So the mobile app has a in-app browser, and that's how users can interact with all the different apps that's built on Stacks. And so you can integrate with Xverse very easily. So anything that works with the Hero wallet on desktop will work with Xverse as long as it's optimized for mobile. If you are looking at it from the Xverse app, so there are two, and soon another way to integrate with Xverse. So first is through Stacks.js. So that's the developer tool that basically every Stacks app is using right now. And use Stacks Connect to connect users' wallet, create transactions, and things like that. And then alternatively, you can also use MicroStacks, which is another open source library built by another Stacks OG. And that has, I think it's a smaller library and might be easier to integrate. And then soon we are launching our Wallet Connect integration. So a lot of developers coming from other blockchains might already be familiar with Wallet Connect because that's kind of like the most popular way, I would say, to connect apps with wallets. So we're launching that soon. And if you want your app to be able to connect to a Xverse wallet or a Stacks compatible wallet, regardless of what platform it is on, you can use Wallet Connect. So if users are on the Xverse mobile app, they can scan a QR code on your app, which is running in a desktop browser, and connect that way. And then they can also sign transactions and everything like that. So yeah, that's basically it. I guess I'll open it up to questions, or if there's anything else I should talk about.
Ken, I've got a question.
Sure.
So if as a well, honestly, I'm kind of curious, what was your experience as a founder within the Stacks ecosystem? And what was, that process like of having a startup idea and then, creating your project and all that?
Yeah, I would say maybe my experience might be a little different from everybody else because I was so involved in the ecosystem from the beginning. And I kind of just saw that there is, a missing part of that ecosystem and there's a need for something like Xverse. So it was very natural for me to say, oh, yeah, I think if I built this thing, a lot of people will want to use it. So that's kind of like how I got started. Um, and I think the Stacks ecosystem has been, it's a very tight knit community. And I feel like compared to some of the other blockchain ecosystems, there's more of kind of like the builder mentality versus kind of like the speculators that a lot of the other chains have, where people are just, in the ecosystem for short-term pumps, right? And I feel like a lot of the Stacks OGs that I've seen, since I started, many of them have stuck with the project through, the ups and downs, the crypto crashes and everything. So, and there's so many smart people in this ecosystem. One of the first reasons that got me into this ecosystem was that there were so many smart people working on this project. Um, Jude, who is at the foundation, and then there's Aaron, who is also PhD in computer science, and also Maniv, right? They're all coming from kind of like the academic background, people who really know what they're doing, and like I just think the technology that is being built is incredible, and the mission as well, to be able to decentralize the internet is also very inspiring, and I can really kind of identify with that. So, and there are so many different entities in this ecosystem that can offer you help for you to start this company. For example, the foundation has this grants program to if you wanted to build like a very limited scope, small project in this ecosystem, you can get funding through that. And then there's Stacks Ventures or Stacks Accelerator, who if you're a little bit later stage, you can apply for funding through that. And they also have a really good program where they teach you the basics of running a startup, how to get started, how to actually build your product, how to pitch to investors and everything. So if you're thinking about starting a startup, like it's a no-brainer, definitely apply to Stacks Ventures. And then there's the pre-accelerator, right? The startup labs, which maybe you're a little bit early and you don't know if you want to start a company yet. I think that's another thing that can give you some support. Yeah. So I think the ecosystem overall is very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I noticed about Stacks when I first got involved was of like that builder mentality that you talked about. Everybody's kind of trying to work toward a goal, whether it's long term or not. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a question about what the difference between Hero and Xverse is. So Hero is a desktop browser extension wallet right now, and I think their goal is basically to allow all these apps to interact with the Stacks blockchain. We are looking at this wallet thing from a different perspective. We want to be a Bitcoin first wallet. So right from the start, we've had a Bitcoin wallet built into Xverse, and we ultimately want to provide an experience where users don't really need to know that they're interacting with Stacks smart contracts. They don't really need to have Stacks in their wallet to do all these NFTs and DeFis and things like that. And we want to be on all platforms, right? So we don't just want to be on mobile. We want to be on desktop as well. And we're open to really working closely with the different applications that are building on Stacks to make sure that the integration works perfectly. Yeah. Cool.
Chad, I see your hand up. Did you have a question?
Oh, thank you, Maria. I wrote down a couple questions here for you, Ken. Number one, I guess the first question would be, did you learn Solidity before you learned Clarity? Is that correct?
No, no, that's actually, I'm not like expert in Clarity, I would say. I know the basics, and I can read a Clarity smart contract and build very simple ones. But where I really got started with Clarity, and then I started taking a look at Solidity a little bit. But I would say I probably will not be comfortable writing anything in Solidity.
I see. Your team, do you have, well, no, I'll skip, no, I'll skip that question. In terms of choosing a project, like we're, all of us here in cohort 5 are beginners. And in the future, when you go to choose a project, do you have any tips on maybe what type of project you should focus on and what it accomplish? Like, also, could you relate, like, what are we trying to, what do you see as what we're trying to accomplish with, what's your best advice in choosing a project?
Yeah, so I think the best way to look at this is be in the space, try out the different applications, right? Join the different mints or whatever, or even just keep an eye out. But I think the idea is that you want to be able to identify the needs, right? Like real needs. If you're just looking at it from the outside, you're not in it, it's sometimes hard to identify those like really like burning needs, right? So I don't think I can say right off the bat, like this specific thing is going to be so useful, you should focus on that. I think it's more about, finding different pain points, right? I think even if somebody gave you an idea to start working on, I think in the journey that startups go through, a lot of times you just have to, like, your initial hypothesis is like 90% chance is not going to be correct, and you'll have to adjust course along the way, like for sure. So having that ability to find the different pain points, I think, is key. So I would recommend starting with that rather than just finding one thing immediately and going to work on it.
Oh, thank you. I have just one last question, Ken. In your experience, what's your impression? The most difficult thing is the front end. The most difficult thing is the back end.
Yeah, so that's interesting because for Xverse, we tend to keep a very, very light back end, right? So the most of our work is in the, you would call it the front end, which is the application, the mobile app. And we have a very small kind of like API server that supplies some information. But I would say for us, the difficulty is kind of in the blockchain business logic rather than the back end or the front end, right? I think, again, like the blockchain technology kind of blurs what is the front end and back end a little bit, because you don't have a lot of these like back end servers running databases like as you would with a Web 2.0 startup like Facebook and Twitter. A lot of things are you store the data on either the blockchain or decentralized storage like Gaia. So I would say, like, front end is probably where you'll spend a lot of your energy. And then if you're building something that's like backed by a smart contract, I would say that is probably the most difficult part. I don't know if you could call that the back end or or front end. Maybe it's like somewhere in between. I don't know. Yeah. Should I just read off the questions in the chat?
Yeah, sure. If you want to go through that, and then if anybody has, questions and you want to unmute your mic, just raise your hand and we'll go through them.
Sure. So there's a question about what are you doing for customer safety, or what you see as the most challenging to keep the wallet safe, right? So Xverse is firstly a non-custodial wallet. So that means the key to your wallet is stored on your device and only on your device. And we never send it anywhere else. And we make sure that we're storing it in a very safe way. So there's actually two different kind of security settings you can have in the wallet. So one is geared more towards convenience, and the other is to maximize security. So one of them is through PIN and biometrics. And with that security setting, we are storing the private keys in the on-device secure key storage. So on both on Android and iOS, they have a special API that allows you to store these keys encrypted using the operating system's own secure storage system. And that way you can unlock and retrieve the key to sign transactions using biometrics. So with like a fingerprint scan or Face ID. So that really maximizes the convenience. And then the higher security setting requires a password. So what we're doing is we're adding an additional layer of security by encrypting the password before even storing it into the on-device security keychain system, so that in the event that the hacker is able to access your device, get your password, they still would not be able to decrypt your private key and gain access to your funds, right? I think it depends on what you're using the wallet for. If you're using it to store large amounts, I would recommend using the password or enhanced security. But if you're just using it to play around with some NFTs, you don't have a lot of money in the wallet, I would say for convenience, you can just use biometrics and PIN, right? And we also go through security audits for our code. So we have a third party come in and take a look at our code and identify anything that that could be a potential vulnerability, and we'll fix those things. We try to do that periodically to make sure that as we build the software, we're not introducing anything new there. So yeah. And then moving on, do you have any advice on what to consider when deciding whether to store something on chain or off chain? Yeah, so I think usually I would recommend that you store anything that's really critical on chain, things that absolutely have to be verifiable, right? That can go on chain. And you probably don't want to store things like images on chain or any sort of like large files, because that could get very expensive very quickly for users and then for you as well. For a lot of like media content, like you can store that off chain. So like maybe like blog posts or videos or things like that. I think that's definitely something you can store off chain. So the idea is that if you can rebuild the state of your application using on-chain data, and then everything else can just be stored off chain. And that's kind of like things that even if you were to lose, you can still like recover it from the on-chain data. The other thing is, I think if you store something on-chain, it's immediately visible to everybody, right? So unless you're using some kind of encryption, people can see what you're storing on-chain, right? And if you want to store something privately, I think the best bet would be to store it offline. Okay, moving on. Can you comment on exploits? Is there a particular exploit that you want me to comment on, or?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Ken. It's great to have you. I arrived a bit late, but yeah, I just wanted to, I think it goes with the same question about security. What do you see is a recurrent threat? Like, is there like something you pay attention within the code? Like, is it when you define a variable? And I don't know, you tell me.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, there's really, I think in general, two kinds of ways you can exploit wallets. One is your private key gets leaked, right? And usually based on what I've seen so far, it's, these things are the fault of the developer, right? I think one previous recent exploit, the developer was basically sending the private key unencrypted through some kind of analytics service to a third party. And basically anyone that had access to that account was able to see everybody's private keys, right? So that's kind of like an obvious thing that just shouldn't happen. But as with some startups, people take shortcuts and they're not really careful, right? So we try to make sure that if we're sending any data at all, we're sending it, like we have to check that this data does not involve anything sensitive like the private key, and who are we sending it to, right? Is this somewhere that we have access to? Is it limited to the people that can see it? And then the second type of exploit that I would see is social engineering. So, the wallet is, working perfectly fine as intended, but the user gets tricked by something. Either it's like a user interface thing, or, just like a very enticing, too good to be true offer. And they end up signing kind of some contract transaction that basically gives somebody else the access to your entire wallet. I think with that, there's actually something really good in Stacks, which is called post conditions, which means for every transaction that you send, you can limit what they can do in that transaction, and you have full visibility into the potential assets that can be transferred in and out using that transaction. And if the transaction tries to do more, it'll fail and everything gets rolled back. So I think that's really good in comparison to Ethereum, where there is a permission where you just grant this application like full access to your funds, and they can do whatever they want with it, like undefined, whatever it is, for a period of time. I think the Stacks security model is much better. Yeah. All right. Guess I should move on.
Thank you, Ken. Great answer.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, who do you recommend for auditing? So there's quite a few firms out there that do that. I wouldn't say like any one of them is like the best or anything like that. We work with Least Authority, which they did a lot of work for projects in the Stacks ecosystem. There's other firms out there, which the name escapes me right now, but I would say go with the big names, right? Yeah. can you explain why on-chain space is expensive? Yeah, so the biggest reason is that the blockchain is stored on every node, right? So every node has to store a full copy of all the data that's on the chain. And there are mechanisms to limit the amount of data that people can store on the chain to prevent the chain from growing too quickly, too much, right? And that's the cost. Whenever you send a transaction, the bigger it is, the more costly it is. So that's why chain space is expensive. And you want to limit the amount of storage that each node needs to have, because the problem is if your nodes are too big, like it's like, you know, hundreds of terabytes, right? Then the regular average Joe can't run a node because nobody has a computer that can store that much data. You would need a data center. So some of the other blockchains out there, like Solana, they, you know, they allow you, you know, tons of transactions to go through the system all at once. And you know, the idea is that all the transactions are cheap, but I think long term that might be another problem where, like right now, I think you have to have a pretty, you know, I think you can only run these nodes if you have some kind of cloud computing system that has access to like almost unlimited resources. Whereas, you know, Bitcoin, I think it's still under like a terabyte, I believe. So basically anybody can run a Bitcoin node on their computer. And same with Stacks. Stacks might grow a little bit faster than Bitcoin because, you know, it's a more complex system, and you know, you need to store more data than you would on the Bitcoin chain. So, but it's still like a very reasonable amount, and people will be able to run Stacks nodes on their computer in the foreseeable future. How transaction costs are determined in Clarity. Yeah, so the cost of a transaction is determined by two things. One is the computing resource that's needed to run the code on your smart contract, and the other is the amount of data that you're sending through, so like I mentioned earlier. And the way that you know, computing cycle is determined is there's actually a contract that sets the I guess the cost for each function that you can call in Clarity, right? And then each node will run through your contract, and it can basically come up with the cost. You will run these functions, and therefore the cost is this much because you're going to be using approximately this much computing resources, right? And that is how the cost is determined, and that can actually change. So like the network can actually vote on how much these functions cost and change that in the future if, you know, it's determined that this function actually doesn't cost that much, and you can just you know, make it cheaper. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay, next one. On average, how long does it take to launch a product starting to build from scratch on Stacks, considering full-time work? I mean, it really depends on, you know, how complex your project is. But I would say if you can't get something running, like an MVP running in under a month, you're probably doing something that's too complicated, because you don't want to, you know, be heads down building this thing for like months, and then by the time you're ready to release it, you realize, hey, nobody really needs this thing, or there's like a gigantic flaw in how it works. You want to be able to launch like a very simple, minimal product as soon as possible, and just be able to get user feedback to see if, one, if there's a market for it, and two, does it actually work, right? So that's what I would say, you know, about the amount of time it takes to launch a project on Stacks. I don't think there's anything different compared to other blockchains. So yeah. Phishing attacks, post conditions. Yeah, I think that's already mentioned. Yellow warning sign, allow mode activate. Yep. Yes, there's a ClearNet feature to test and get the cost of your functions in your contract. Yep. Opinion on the recent FTX events and what effect it can have on the total crypto space. So I think everybody is, probably wondering the same thing. I mean, I don't have more information than all of you about what's actually happening in the background. I hope this comes to a good resolution, and people don't end up losing their deposits. But I think one thing to keep in mind is that you should always keep your crypto in your own wallet instead of on exchange. I don't know how so many people are still keeping their tokens and coins on exchanges even after we've had so many exchanges and CeFi companies go under. You just can't 100% trust exchanges no matter how big they look, right? The best way is always to keep your crypto maybe on a hardware wallet yourself, and then you're basically insulated if the exchange goes under or gets hacked or anything like that. Do you have plans to support other chains on Xverse? Yeah, we're open to supporting other chains on Xverse. We're going to focus on Bitcoin and Stacks to start, and in the future we do want to support potentially Ethereum and other chains, because I think there's tons of people using other chains already, lots of liquidity, lots of money on these other chains, and we want to provide an easy way for people to kind of bridge in between the different chains. So one good way to bring users into this ecosystem would be to offer support for something like Ethereum, so that people can maybe just swap their assets that's on some Ethereum DeFi protocol into Stacks and into Bitcoin. Yeah. Subnet's going to play positively in this dynamic storage on chain. Yes, I believe so. Although probably need to look into the actual technical details before I can really comment on that. Transactions can fail if fees are below threshold. Yes, I think currently if your fee is below the threshold, the nodes won't even accept your transaction. So it'll just reject it outright. One-time upfront cost, right? So that's actually something that's unique to Stacks. So on Ethereum with Solidity, it's a Turing complete language. So that means you can have loops in your program, and that means it's not possible to determine how much computing resources that this program will consume unless you actually go and run it, right? So that's why in Ethereum you don't know for sure how much the gas fees are. You kind of have to just set one, so like a maximum, and then see how much it actually consumes. Whereas on Stacks with Clarity, it's a non-Turing complete language, which means there's nothing like loops or anything like that. So you can 100% determine what the costs are to run this program ahead of time. So you can set that cost, set the transaction cost. Nodes know what exactly the transaction costs are. And that's why it's a one-time upfront cost rather than something that's, an estimate.
Excuse me to interrupt you, Ken. I'm not sure I understand it well, because that information that is being stored on the chain is going to have to be stored by all the nodes for an indefinite amount of time. Is that free?
Yeah. So that's a different. So that's a good point. Yeah, that's the way it is right now. Even on Bitcoin, right? If you write something to the Bitcoin chain, it's there forever, and that's why there's a cost to doing that. And the idea is that the storage will become cheaper, faster than the blockchain will grow in the future. As long as that happens, then we don't have an issue, right? If you remember, like back in the days, computers only had like, I think in the late 90s, computers had like 2 gigabytes of disk space, whereas now like any computer, like the cheapest computer you buy, will have like a terabyte, right?
So that is free. I mean,
Yeah,
it's free to
it
the
is.
extent that miners are willing to continue
Yeah.
the chain.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's being calculated is actually the cost of writing onto the chain. Not entirely sure actually, so exactly how to separate these two things.
Yeah, so there's 2 costs, right? There's a cost that's the computing cycles that you need to run this program. And then there's the cost of the data that you're storing on chain. So 2 different things here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a question for you. I make it simple. If you can talk about Bitcoin NFTs, if that's not confidential.
Sure. I mean, it is a public working group that's working on BTC NFTs, and you guys are all welcome to jump in there and look at what's being worked on. I think it's a really cool project. I think it'll be kind of like a aha moment for a lot of Bitcoiners that you can just mint an NFT using a Bitcoin transaction, and we're looking to support that from Xverse wallet. Yeah.
I heard about a mint runner. I don't really know what that is.
To be honest, I'm not sure either.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the working group is public, so I think everybody can just go in there and take a look.
Thank you.
All right. When would you recommend not building on the blockchain and using traditional databases? Yeah, so if what you're storing, is something that you don't need distributed consensus for, like you should just use a traditional database, right? Like I think people try to put everything on the blockchain, but that's just unnecessary. And at most, one thing that you can do is if you want to be able to verify the authenticity of the data and that it hasn't been altered, you can always take your data, hash it, and then store the hash on chain so that in the future, you can take, if you read back the data, you can compare it to the hash on chain and see if this data has been modified, if it's authentic, right? So that's something you can do. Otherwise, yeah, I think I would say for most applications, it's not necessary to store things on the blockchain, and you would be better off building it using a traditional database. Do you think Xverse might eventually offer a stacks mining pool? Potentially, yeah. So we have a stacking pool right now, and we're open to the idea of running mining pools. So the problem with mining pools right now is that the foundation, the technological foundations are not there yet. So we still need a couple of features that are coming in Stacks 2.1 that's going to enable that. And then somebody will have to kind of build the software to run that. We currently don't have that on our roadmap, but if somebody builds an open source version of that, we'll be happy to run it. But yeah, and then in the future, if it becomes like a really strong need for the ecosystem, we could spend some resources building that out too. Okay, 2 kilobytes. Xverse uses database that is not blockchain. So we don't actually. So all of the data that you see on your Xverse app, that's coming from a Stacks node or derived from data on the Stacks node, including state that is related to the stacking pool. That's all in our smart contract. So we actually don't run any databases that store data right now. Yeah. All right, I think yeah, I think that's all the questions in the chat. So if you guys have anything else, I'll be feel free to just speak up, I guess.
Ken, I have my question is a little too early. Anyway, does who owns the future? Does Clarity Stacks own the future, like 5 years from now? Like it'll be dominant and Ethereum will be cut down in popularity, or do we have to share the future with Ethereum and Solidity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's hard for anyone to kind of just predict what will happen in the long-term future. I think Stacks being the one to unlock all these applications on Web3 for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin being still the most dominant blockchain, I think there's a good chance that Stacks might be the kind of like the top smart contracts blockchain, bigger than Ethereum, possibly. How Ethereum will do is kind of difficult to say right now, because there's a lot of other layer ones that's coming up and challenging Ethereum, right? So and these blockchains offer advantages over Ethereum, like faster confirmation times, cheaper transaction fees, and things like that. So I think time will tell, but maybe at least in the next 5 years, I think it's probably going to be, a multi-chain kind of universe that will have several dominant blockchains, and whether or not like a single one of them is going to win out over everyone else, I think that's probably going to take longer to see. That's just my opinion. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Anybody else?
I've got a question for you, Ken.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you've kind of been involved in Stacks, like even back when it was still Blockstack. I guess I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to what it was that attracted you to Stacks and, kind of made you decide that this is, you mentioned that Xverse right now is focused on Stacks and Bitcoin. What is it about those chains that kind of made you decide that's what you wanted to put your focus on?
Yeah, so the thing that really attracted me to Stacks is the mission. Right at the beginning, the mission for Stacks was very clear that we want to build a decentralized internet where users take back control from these Web 2.0 giants like Facebook, Google, and all those other companies, and that these companies shouldn't be allowed to say whether or not they want to be evil, right? Because Google's famous tagline was "Don't be evil," and Manib in one of his TED Talks said that companies should, the line should really be, you can't be evil, right? And to do that, you need to have users control their own data, their identity, and Bitcoin and Stacks basically is the technology that will allow you to do that. And if the applications in the future are all built on this technology, then you can really say users have much more control over their identity, their data, and everything. So that's the thing that really inspired me. And I think the ultimate goal of this ecosystem is still to do that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I've kind of gotten the feeling that most people on Stacks kind of have that same, right? They identify with that same mission, and that's kind of why they're drawn to it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. No, I was just gonna say we're in our last 10 minutes here. I don't know if anybody has any other questions. Rafa, is that a serious question?
Yeah, can I hire you for my startup idea?
I mean,
Let's
feel free to reach
partner.
out, and I can discuss and everything, and try to help as much as I can. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, at this point, you won't be corrupted. It can't be evil all the way.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have the means to corrupt you anyways, but yeah.
Ken, what front end, if you're allowed to, if this is allowed, what front end do you use for your wallet?
So on Xverse mobile, we use React Native, the framework for our UI, and for the browser extension, we are using React.
What do you think of Vue?
I don't have too much experience with Vue, but from what I've seen so far, I think like very simple applications, probably it's easier to build with Vue. But I think as soon as you start to get a little more complicated, I'm not sure if Vue would still be the right choice. I mean, I haven't seen any like large scale projects use Vue, but that could just be me.
Thank you. Thanks.
Voting process on Stacks. Yeah, so there's we're running this I guess a walkthrough on how to vote for Stacks 2.1. I believe it's next week. If you want to know the exact time, join our Discord, and we'll be giving you guys notifications on when that is, and you can just jump in and look and see how to do that. What features in 2.1 are you excited for, and what would you like to see in future releases? Yeah, so for 2.1, the most interesting thing for me or Xverse is going to be the stacking improvements. So I think the most important one is that you can stack immediately after finishing a cycle. There's no cooldown cycle, and that you will be able to also just add on to your existing stacking amount that you've already delegated. So I think that improves the user experience a lot, because right now, all the, like I would say the top kind of question or confusion that people have with stacking is that they don't get why they now miss a cycle after they finish stacking for the previous however many cycles that they set, and that's changing. So in 2.1, you can just so we're doing this thing. We're trying to do this thing to make it even simpler, so that users are essentially saying, okay, I'm going to stack, right? I start stacking and I don't need to worry about how long I need to set or give myself a reminder to restack once that period has expired. So it'll continue to be stacked for one cycle continuously. And then if the user chooses to unstack, then they can go in and revoke the delegation. And at the end of the current stacking cycle, your stacks will unlock automatically and we won't restack it for you. So it turns into much more of a push to start and then push to stop kind of UX versus what it is now, where you have to kind of, okay, should I stack for like 4 cycles and then is that like in a month or 2 months and then come back and restack it? How do I maximize my returns, but also being able to have liquidity, right? So I think that's the biggest UX improvement that's in our heads right now for 2.1.
One more question. Ken, are you aware, like my goal in the future is to build a voting systems application that would accomplish governance and elections for small and large organizations. Are you aware of anybody in Stacks that is building a voting systems application?
I'm not aware anyone's doing that. No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would say the console DAO and Orlando's building Stacker DAO Labs. It's close to what you're talking about, but I think that's for like a limited size community to vote on like specific projects. Might not be exactly what you're thinking about. Yeah.
Ken, I dropped the invitation to the Xverse Discord. Are there any other places that you recommend people go to learn more about Xverse or to get, in touch with the team over there or the community?
Yeah, so Discord is the best way to get in touch with us and join the community. And if you follow us on Twitter, that's probably the best place to kind of get updates and other stuff. Yeah. So our Twitter is Xverse app.
What's your favorite NFT?
Favorite NFT? To be honest, I don't really have a favorite one. I think they're all really cool in their own way. Yeah, so I don't really have a favorite one. That's honest answer.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, we are coming up on the hour here, so I think we can start wrapping it up, make sure we're respectful of everyone's time. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today and for this Q&A and, for this conversation. This was really, really cool. Yeah, and
yes, my pleasure.
If anybody else has questions, then, right, I guess hop into the Xverse Discord and have conversations there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thanks everybody for participating with us this morning.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Ken.
much, Ken.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.